Okay, it's me, Geordie Pete Redding on Hollywood Balls, and I've passed a late fitness test, I'm pleased to tell you. So probably just as well that my next guest, he's probably the most famous holder of the magic sponge, worked at Arsenal for a total of 22 years, as well as senior head of physio with England, head of medical services at West Ham. Welcome to Hollywood Balls, Gary Lewin.
Hey, how you doing? Nice to be here.
Very well, thanks. Very well. I can't say any other really when we're in your company. What have you been up to recently?
Well, I've come out of football now and set up a clinic with my cousin Colin, who was at Arsenal with me and then took over from me. And we've had the Lewin Sports Injury Clinic up and running now since last October. So just working hard to get that established.
Plenty of injuries in and around your way then to keep you busy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everywhere around the world at the moment. It's unprecedented times and it's a very strange world. Obviously, we went from lockdown where we had to close for nearly 3 months. And then the good thing that came out of it was a lot more people did exercise, which is good for business. So it's good for society in general, but for sports injury clinics, it's great business. And so we're picking up all the new injuries now.
Great stuff. Got to take you way back down memory lane. You started your career as a player with the Gunners, but you were a keeper. Were you always between the sticks as a young lad?
Definitely always between the sticks. When I was a very young lad, I didn't fancy all that running around on the pitch. So I went in goal. And I was fortunate enough to be seen by Arsenal when I was 14 and signed schoolboy forms there. They didn't have the academies in those days. In those days, until you were 14, you could play for any club. And then at 14, you chose which club you were going to go with. As an Arsenal fan, it was an easy choice for me. So I went with Arsenal and signed apprentice forms when I was 16, pro when I was 17, and then unfortunately got released when I was 18.
Yeah, it's a tough game. We've had quite one or two of our former players on saying, you know, it's very few that actually do make it, but still they want to have a career in the game. Speaking of which, you were actually looking at one point as a possible career with the police. How did that pan out and that you came to Highbury as a physio?
Yeah, it was weird times. I was told that I was being released, which was a big shock to the system for any person that just dreamt about being a professional footballer. I was very lucky at school in that I managed to get 9 O-levels as they were then. I told you I'm old.
Wow.
But I never had any A-levels. And so what I had to do was decide what I want to do in my life. So I had the opportunity to go and play at lower levels or go and trial at lower levels. But at the time, there was a physio at Arsenal called Fred Street, who ironically was the Arsenal and England physio. And Fred took me to one side and said, would you fancy doing physiotherapy? Because I can arrange for you to go to Guy's Hospital. I know the principal there, Mr. Cooper, and go and have a look. So I went and had a look and I got interested. But I had to do A-levels before I could do anything. So I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to do physiotherapy or go into the police force, or the other option I had was to do PE as a PE teacher.
Right.
So I went into the hospital, really liked what I saw, and then got the bug for physiotherapy. So I left Arsenal, went and played at Barnet for a year whilst I did my A-levels, and then fortunately got accepted at Guy's Hospital, started training in 83. Then probably my biggest break came then in that Fred Street retired and Arsenal invited me to do the reserve team and youth team whilst I trained as a chartered physio.
Wow.
So as long as you had your first aid qualifications, which I did, I could run on for the reserves and youth team. So did that for 3 years, and then George Graham came in and again, right place, right time, he invited me to be the first team physio.
Great stuff. You mentioned Fred Street there. Do you sort of see Fred as a mentor for you in your career?
I would never have got anywhere near where I am over the years and what I'd achieved without Fred. Fred was a mentor at the time. He's continued to be a mentor. I actually spoke to him last week, and he's very well. And we talk all the time, and that's been the same throughout my career. Even coming into private practice now, I'd never done private practice before, and Fred had. He left Arsene to go into private practice. So even now, even though he's retired, he's still been a mentor for me and a big help to me.
Wow. Now, one of our regular Hollywood Balls guests is someone you probably know, Kevin Campbell.
Yeah, Rambo.
Yeah, who speaks very highly of and fondly of George Graham, who you just mentioned. Now he was the man that handed you that the medical rope, so to speak, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah, George became the manager in '86 in that June. I qualified that summer. And then the physio at the time was a guy called Roy Johnson, who George and Roy parted company. And I know George spoke to Fred, and he actually asked Fred if he'd come back, but Fred wasn't interested. And Fred said to George, "Why don't you move Gary up? I can help him, I can mentor him." And George did that, and we had a great relationship. We had some great years together with George and Theo Foley, who unfortunately died a few weeks ago. And we had some great times. And he was great to work for. He was a good, nice guy, very disciplined, very hardworking, and expected the same from his staff. And what I would say, he probably gave me the upbringing, for want of a better phrase, of how to work in football. And again, I owe him a lot.
Fantastic. Now, trends and technology, they've obviously changed, as I suppose, of managers' attitudes as well. But it's fair to say Arsene Wenger was being quite the scientist, as I would like to call him. He probably had a deeper understanding of the job that you were trying to do with the players, do you think?
Yeah, he changed a lot. And technologies have changed over the years. I mean, when I first started, there was no such thing as ultrasound scans or MRI scans or CT scans. And it was an X-ray or nothing in my day. And Arsene came on board in 96, 97. And he brought with him a completely change in emphasis, in that with George, and the whole culture of football was the same, in that the one important thing was the match day. Yeah. So during the week, things were not lax because they trained hard, but it was all about how you performed on the Saturday. And if you got a great result on the Saturday, there's every chance the gaffer will give you 2 days off. Whereas Arsene, his attitude towards it is you train to be able to play. And if you don't train well, you won't play well. And he demanded in the training the same sort of attitude, the same sort of desire, the same sort of commitment you got in a game. So you train the way you played. And if you didn't do that during the week, he wouldn't play you. So days off went, recovery sessions came in, preparation came in. If anything, the sessions got a little bit shorter, but they become more intense. And he changed the players' attitude to training, to nutrition, to preparation. We stayed overnight in hotels a lot more. And he made players far more focused about playing football.
So in essence, I mean, as well, for you as a professional in your career and a pivotal part of the team, when a new manager comes in, your role changes as well. I mean, in certain aspects, doesn't it?
That happens with any physio. When physios are at clubs and a new manager comes in, it's really important you get to know their philosophy, you get to know the way they want to work, and you have to buy into that philosophy. Otherwise, you won't survive. So you have your own medical protocols. I mean, we have a code of conduct as physiotherapists. We have a duty of care to the players, but that has to be encapsulated by the philosophy of where the club are, the way we play, the way we prepare. And one thing Arsene was really good at was talking to his staff, sharing ideas with his staff, and discussing with his staff. And if there are things that we weren't comfortable about or things that we think we could improve, his door was always open. And every morning he would say things like, "How do you think the players are today? Have you seen anyone that might have a problem? Is there anyone that's tired? Does anyone look fatigued? Do you think any of them haven't slept well?" And on a match day, it was something that was quite unusual for players. When they went on their pre-walk, he would go around and talk to them. "How are you feeling today? Did you get a good night's sleep? Wow. Do you have any problems?" And he was very open with players and staff, which was actually very refreshing to work with. And as you've seen over the years, players love that. And players that worked under Arsene would always speak very fondly of him.
Great stuff. Now, there's a fantastic picture when I was doing my research in the archives of you holding back a certain Ian Wright from Peter Schmeichel. Wright, he's a proper character, Gary. I've got to ask you, who would have won that scrap, him or Peter?
I think for size, Peter, but if he could have caught Wrighty, that would be the problem, because Wrighty was like a little whippet, and he would jab and run. So I think that would have been a quite close contest. And I must admit, when I did the job interview to get the job, security didn't really come into it. But over the years with Wrighty, it became quite a strong point of mine.
Good stuff. England, you started out with England as part-time. I mean, was that difficult to balance domestic and international roles?
Yeah, I mean, that was a strange time, really, in that it was 96. Glen Hoddle became the England manager.
Yeah.
And I was actually on holiday in America. And my father-in-law was going around my house and checking the post and phoned us out there and said, "Oh, you've had a message on your phone from Glen Hoddle." So I said to my wife, "Oh, this is a wind-up. I mean, ex-Tottenham talking to Arsenal physio, that's never going to happen in a million years." So I got my wife to phone the number to make sure that he actually was legitimate and not a wind-up. And it was. It was Glen, and basically he invited me to work with England part-time. So it was difficult to mix the two together and quite demanding. But if you think about it, it was no different to what the players would do. They would report on the first day of international duty and go back to the club at the end of it. It became harder as the clubs become more professional and the demands become greater. It reduced the amount of holiday I'd have every year. It would reduce the amount of time I had at home. But when you're enjoying a job as much as I did, you didn't care. You didn't mind. You just loved being part of it. And I was really, really lucky to have 20 years with England. I mean, yeah. I did 230 odd matches, and I wouldn't have swapped that for the world. It was some of the greatest experiences of my life. And more than anything, it was a great, great honour. I mean, even to the last couple of games, whenever we sang the national anthem before the game, I get goosebumps. And I don't think you can ever change that.
And obviously, the more Arsenal players that were in the England side, the easier your job because you knew them.
Yeah, it made life a lot easier. I mean, I would joke with a lot of Tottenham. My son-in-law's a Tottenham fan. And I would joke with a lot of Tottenham fans. Unfortunately, in my last 10 years with England, I probably treated more Tottenham players than Arsenal players. But one thing you did is even with England, when you went to a tournament, you become a family. And even now, when I bump into players from the '98 squad, I see Robert Lee quite a lot. Yeah. Obviously, Alan Shearer from that era. Jamie Redknapp, and even later Gary Neville, and I did an interview with them on Sky recently. And you become a family, you become really close friends, and that friendship lasts for all your life. So when you bump into these guys, it's always nice to see them and catch up with them. And as I said, you become part of a family.
It's interesting you say that, and sticking with England. I think it was a few months back now, there was a big sort of football gathering here in Dubai, and I was lucky enough to be there as the media, and a certain Fabio Capello came walking over, and like he carries an aura about him.
That's right, yeah.
He sort of came over to me as a very strict disciplinarian. How was he to work with?
It was chalk and cheese on the football pitch. Totally focused, totally disciplined, nothing else mattered. And it was all about the game, all about the preparation. And I think that showed in all our, if I remember rightly, before the 2010 World Cup, I think we only lost one match against Ukraine away. And that's when Rob Green got sent off in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And we'd already qualified. So every game was important. Every training session was important. He was very, very disciplined with the players. But when you got to know him as a person, complete opposite. Really nice guy, interested in, he loved art, he loved talking about culture and history. We spent a week together in South Africa when we were doing the recce for the World Cup, and was fascinated in the history of South Africa, and really, really interesting guy to talk to, and would tell us with great love about his place that he had in Switzerland on the border of Italy. And really, really nice guy. And different to Arsene, different to George, but and Sven and the people I work with in Glen, but really interesting to work with people that do the same job in a completely different manner. So again, from a physio perspective, you're continually learning about different ways of achieving the same things. And
Wow.
really disappointed when he left. And he's the one that took me on full time. So I owe him again a great debt.
Now, certain players have unfortunately always struggled with injuries, as fans know. Is this just plain bad luck, do you think, Gary, or is there a mental aspect to say if it's been a bad initial injury and then they sort of don't recover from that?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. Often with these guys, it stems from one significant injury that started it all off. I remember a well-known one at Arsene, Abu Diaby, when he broke his ankle. That was the catalyst for many injuries. And Jack Wiltshire, who it wasn't when I was there, I was with him with England. And although he had a stress fracture in his ankle, he then had a significant ankle injury when playing against Man United. And I think it's a combination where they get a significant injury, the biomechanics of their body never really recover from it, and then they get secondary injuries. From a mental point of view, it doesn't mean they're mentally weak whatsoever. If anything, I think they're mentally stronger because they recover from these injuries, and a lot of people wouldn't recover from them. But they definitely carry a mechanical issue, a loading issue. And it's a challenge for medical teams to try and get over these problems and get them back on the pitches. But some of it is bad luck. You can't account for some of the injuries they get, and now they happen. I mentioned 2 there, and they were 2 bad tackles. You can't account for that.
You'd be busy up at St James's Park this year, I can tell you that for nothing.
Righty's a physio up there, and I've known Derek for a long, long time. And Derek actually was like me. He was an apprentice at Arsenal. Yeah. And he showed me some pictures once of when he was sitting watching the Arsenal first team, and he had a Newcastle scarf on while he was watching the Arsenal first team. And oh Christ, Derek's been there a long, long time. Really, really nice guy. But yes, like quite a few clubs, they've had a few injuries.
Lastly, you mentioned Lewin Clinic, which is going great, and that's fantastic. But I've got to ask you, do you get patients that just maybe hold you up a little bit by asking for tales of your football days while they're in there?
They're the best ones because you end up sitting there talking and touching them because all they want to do is talk football. Yeah, I mean, yes. I get a lot of fans in here that support different clubs, and we just talk football. And unfortunately, I'm a football geek and I just love football. And when I'm not watching Arsenal, I will go and watch football no matter what is what is going on. And when I first left West Ham, I went and worked at Woking FC for 6 months just to help out. I know Alan Dowson, Martin Tyler, manager and assistant manager over there. And I went and worked there for 6 months because I just love being involved in football. And one of my get-outs at the moment is I'm a consultant to the Arsenal women's team. So I work with the Arsenal women's team. We're going to the Champions League in 2 weeks to finish off last year's tournament, and have been quite successful the last couple of years. So I get my adrenaline rush from working with the women's team at the moment. So I can't ever see me changing it, despite having this clinic and really enjoying working at the clinic. My connection with football will never go too far away.
Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Well, I've come through this session unscathed. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Let me watch it. Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Gary. We thank you so much for taking the time, and we hopefully will catch up with you soon. Ladies and gents of Hollywood Balls, Gary Lewin.
Thank you, Pete. Nice to speak to you, mate. Good luck.